gotta be honest, it's nearly impossible to sit here on this very stage, one of the biggest in all of women's sports, and not reflect on the pioneers and, frankly, legislation that got us to this point. This year's the 50th anniversary of Title IX, a 37-word statute that aimed to regulate rampant discrimination against women. And while we celebrate the advancements and accomplishments Title IX has brought, Dr. Amira Rose Davis notes that the path to true equity has miles to go.
How do you measure 50 years? In the wins? In the number of obstacles you've overcome? The distance still to go? How can 50 years feel like a world away and yesterday, all at the same time? 50 years ago, women took to the street, to the courthouse, to the courts, to fight for gender equality. 50 years ago, women couldn't serve on a jury, couldn't have a mortgage or credit card in their name. Women could be legally fired for getting pregnant or calling out sexual harassment. There were outright bans on athletic participation. What is so threatening about a woman running?
I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
50 years ago, trailblazers fought like hell for Title IX, for legal protections, for access, for opportunity. But Title IX is a Band-Aid. Its 37 words changed the game, but did not heal the wound. Title IX was not initially about sports, but athletics became the playground of projections and ideas about equality. And through sports, we have measured progress for women.
Venus Williams has become the highest-paid woman athlete in the world, signed a $40 million endorsement deal with Reebok.
Go! The United States has won the Women's World Cup.
50 years may seem distant, but these battles are familiar.
Despite all the wins, I'm still paid less than men who do the same job that I do. And I've been told that I don't deserve any more than less because I am a woman.
We still fight for equal pay, for pregnancy protections, for resources.
Let me show y'all the men's weight room.
We still fight for access, for inclusion, to be believed. We still fight for safety.
I don't want another young gymnast or any individual to experience the horror that I endured.
We still fight to wear what we want, for opportunity, for authenticity, for ourselves.
It's our destiny, know what we stand for.
Still, always, onward.
We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation.
This generation has been forged in fire. They are taking the torch and are ready to burn it all down, to blaze their own trail.
Jubilation!
Your categories cannot contain you. Your expectations are not their limit. Underestimate them at your own peril.
How did she do that?
How foolish to deny yourself their greatness. They have the ball in their court, the next 50 on their mind. They got next, so watch out.
Dr. Davis's reflection on the first 50 years and the future of Title IX is part of ESPN's 50/50, an initiative to explore and analyze Title IX and the women who are helping move the world forward. Women like Sedona Prince, we saw her video from last year's tournament. It led to an equity review. I gotta be honest, it's nearly
There we go. What a great video. Wow. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jill Osur from Teneral Cellars, and this is our latest episode of Teneral Talks as we approach the 50th anniversary of Title IX next week on June 23rd. I have a great cast of amazing people today that are joining us. And so I'm going to do some quick introductions, and then we're going to get right to it. But we are thrilled to have Carol Oglesby from the Women's Sports International. She is known as a sports activist, an athlete, a physical educator, a coach, a sports psychologist, the first president of the AIAW. We're going to hear a lot more from her in a few minutes. We have Emma Reed. Emma was the producer of that amazing video that we just saw, a two-time Emmy Award-winning storyteller. And she produces high-end features for a variety of shows and projects, including Sports Center, Monday Night Football, the Women's NCAA Tournament. It was this past women's basketball tournament that she produced the 50 years of Title IX that we just saw, which was so amazing. Jocelyn Meyer is also an Emmy Award-winning director. We are among greats today, everybody. There we go. Her 9 years with the worldwide leader with ESPN, she's directed NHL, NBA, WNBA, college football and college basketball games. She directed the first college game day for women's basketball game in the nearly 20 years this past season. She's also executed the creative lead-in into the 50 years of Title IX piece that aired during the Women's Final Four. And then Anna Danziger Halpern from the New York Historical Society. And I'll tell you, if you're not in New York now, you're going to need to plan to be in New York before September 4th to see the Title IX activism on and off the field exhibit that it commemorates the 50th anniversary of Title IX. In addition to the Education Amendments Act of 1972 that fundamentally reshaped American society by prohibiting discrimination based on sex and education programs and activities that receive federal assistance. Anna was one of a few amazing people that came together to pull this exhibit together. We're going to hear a lot more from her as well. So welcome, all four of you. I'm so blessed to be in your presence today. And, it's interesting. So I wanted to focus on Title IX for Teneral Cellars because I am one of the fortunate ones that because of Title IX, I was given the opportunity to receive a scholarship to play softball at the University of California, Berkeley. Go Bears. And so how I show up every day, both as a human being, as a leader, has everything to do with my experience in sports. And when I wanted to not only educate people on where we've come in 50 years, but also all the work that needs to be done, we use all of our wine as a conduit for change so that we can open a bottle and open a conversation, the necessary conversations for us to be the change that we want to see. And so we're really fortunate to be partnering with Billie Jean King and the Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative. We have $5 from every one of our Perfect Match collections going back to her initiative so that she can continue the amazing work she does to create a world free of discrimination and inequality. So happy to be here again with all of you. So Carol, you have such an amazing history. Your activism has helped shape opportunities for all women and girls today. And I'd love to start with you and just on your background a little bit and tell us more about the Women's Sports International.
Thank you so much, Jill, for having me on the program and actually sponsoring all of the programs that are a sequence of the work that you folks are doing at Teneral Cellars. It's great. I'm excited to learn that you are a softball player. Softball was where I started. And it was actually through the connection of other people that were softball players in Southern California that I was drawn into the Association Intercollegiate Athletics for Women so long ago now. But that organization was sponsoring the championships for 10 years before there was a takeover of the NCAA. It's a good story in itself, but so maybe I can spark in a few things about that past
Absolutely.
history. But I want to bookend that with my relationships with the Women's Sport International through a combination of circumstances, but especially because I was involved with high-level women athletes that were coming out of the collegiate programs. I got connected to an international circuit and became a part of the formation of Women's Sport International. And it's just been really exciting for me to see how Title IX, those 37 words, and what was happening in the United States was seen as kind of a roadmap to some extent in the rest of the world. Of course, every country pursues their own path, but it was illustrative in so many ways about how things could begin. And now we're seeing organizations like the Women's Sport Foundation of South Africa, NowSpar, a women's sport group in Zambia, all through Africa, in Latin America, Central America, Women's Sport Foundation type programs. So there is an influence from the U.S. Around the world, even though things are different everywhere. So anyway, great pleasure for me to be here, and I'm so excited to hear other people from our program.
No, but Carol, before we do that, tell us a little more about the mission of the Women's Sports International.
Well, one of the things that we've seen here in the U.S., and I think probably everybody on our panel would agree with this, that data seems to lead the way. You can't just count on the people that you're trying to influence in government or in business to believe your story about the importance of sport for girls and women. You have to show it to them in black and white in the numbers. So Women's Sport International was conceived and has carried its mission out as a relatively small activist group that scopes out what are the most critical issues of the day and develops data so that people who want to advocate can go with armed with data. And so there's a physiological issue around women as high-level athletes in some sports, referred to as the athlete triad. What happens when women that are in distance running or say gymnastics, where the body fat ratio goes down so low that it impacts on their physiological functioning. So the athlete triad was the first thing. Also, sexual harassment and abuse of women. No, the sports world did not want to see that was happening 20 years ago, but the data that the WSI researchers put together was very influential. So that's right now we're trying to turn ourselves to the transgender and differences in sex characteristics issues that are really ripping at what's happening here in the United States. So we try to pick the hard things and get some data on them.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back to that because obviously inclusion is so important and the data is going to be critical in driving that conversation. Anna, I'd love to move to you because, again, to hear more about this exhibit, what's behind it, your role in that, because this is so exciting. And September is going to be here before we know it. So we need to make sure to drive as many people watching and sharing information about this exhibit. So share more with us about that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having us here. We're so excited to be in conversation with everyone else that's here today. So our exhibit, Title IX Activism on and Off the Field, it was collectively curated by the Center for Women's History at the New York Historical Society, which I'm ecstatic to be a part of. And when we saw that this anniversary of this momentous legislation was coming down the horizon, we really knew that we had to put together an exhibition. The Historical Society is lucky to host the archives of Billie Jean King and the Women's Sports Foundation. And we really wanted to put our archives, our collections in conversation with the broad history of this legislation that, it was only 37 words, but affects a student's entire educational life. And so we did that by putting together those collections in conversation with objects belonging to individuals who've been part of that 50-year story. So we conducted dozens of interviews with activists who have been part of that story over the last 50 years and, up through the present, pushing to make meaning out of those 37 words. Activists on Capitol Hill, in the legal system, on campuses, students and faculty, educators and curriculum writers who are changing classroom materials. So really, it's a complicated and broad story, but I think what pulls through a through line is that story of activism and really the momentous changes that we see in society today around women in professional spaces, in sports, in just being athletes on the street ourselves, right? There's major changes in popular culture. That is all possible because of the work of so many different people over the 50 years, and that's what we really wanted to highlight in the exhibition.
Wow. So I'm really curious, as you pull together, an exhibition like that, was there something that really stuck out to you that you were surprised by? I'm just curious, as you curate all of this, were there missing pieces? Were there just really things that's stood out to you? And because what an incredible opportunity to be part of something so monumental.
Yeah, and the process itself is sort of snowballing. We would have a conversation with activists who'd been involved, for example, in the 1970s, lobbying on Capitol Hill in these new feminist women's organizations that are just for the first time coming together to push for this kind of legislation around education and other feminist priorities. And they would tell us, oh, you should talk to this other person, and it's just this snowballing story. And it was some of those conversations were my favorite to have. I'm a historian of the 1970s is my particular period, and so it was really wonderful to hear about this small group of women who are sitting around the table with people like Patsy Mink and Edith Green, who are some of the champions of Title IX legislation on the Hill, and then working with them to convince Congress and to convince presidential administrations that they were, well, as one of our interviewees told us, even though it was a small group of women there on those conference tables, that they're harnessing the sort of mythical marching millions who are with them, and that they were representing all of these other people. So we have in the exhibit, for example, T-shirts and pin back buttons that say things like Uppity Women Unite and God Bless Title IX, and these symbols that they were really just, they're women who are in their early 20s who just had the kind of chutzpah and moxie to say, you know what, we're going to do this, and we're going to convince Congress to stand up against, for example, the NCAA and college athletic directors and say, we're going to protect this legislation and keep it from being watered down.
Wow, that's fantastic. And where can people get their tickets for that or find out more information about that?
Our website is nyhistory.org. And as you mentioned, the exhibit is open through September 4th. We also have a whole host of fantastic public programming that is virtual. We actually have a program later tonight. But we did a keynote conversation with Billie Jean King and the journalist Jessica Luther a couple months back. That's available online on our website as well. And we also have a blog, which is womenatthecenter.nyhistory.org, where we share more of these great stories from the exhibit.
That's fantastic. It's so amazing. And I know, even though I was in New York yesterday for a hot second for the Tory Burch conference, didn't have time to make it over there. I will be back very soon to go see that and spend a lot of time there. So Emma, we're going to go to you next. We watched your amazing video at the start of this conversation. Tell us more about that and the work you do, because you have such a fun, unique, interesting, perspective on the world of sports, and sports tends to take that front stage of when we think about Title IX, even though it's so much more inclusive than that.
Absolutely, Jill. Thank you very much. With any project, I pour the passion and the dedication into the story, right? So I I may not know everything about Title IX, so I immersed myself into it. And in doing so, not only educating myself of what has happened in the past, but also just recognizing how far we have come is just incredible, but also recognizing where we are now and what we need to do going forward. So producing that was, as a woman, was really, it was emotional. It was life-changing. I know it was impactful for a lot of people. And so, yeah, so producing storytelling is I'm not the best speaker, so I apologize. So yes, it's all about encompassing the direction we want to go in with that one. We wanted to make people uncomfortable, right? We wanted to deliver the facts, but not with hard blows. So we did that, and I felt the imagery and the moments, and seeing Billie Jean, and it's those moments that we need to present to our viewers and our world to see this next generation of what they're going to do.
Well, thank you for producing that. And even if you're not comfortable with your words, your storytelling and your visuals when you produce things like that are so impactful. What was the reaction when that aired, during the tournament?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I actually feel like Jocelyn.
She's very used to being on the other side of the camera. So
yes, behind that. You can tag team on this if you want. So we've got the both of you. We might as well do that.
I will say, at least obviously within our leadership team, within our creative team, within our ESPN family, that a lot of eyes and ears were on this piece because of how important it was. So I know the impact it had was great, and it was well received. But again, because we went at it in a tough, hard angle, that kind of took some people by surprise, but that's what we wanted to do. And it's awesome to have a leadership team behind you to support you in that way, to storytell in that way. But I think you can speak to more.
Oh, I'll say we had the viewing for our production meeting before it aired at the Women's Final Four, which included Carolyn Peck, Rebecca Lobo, a couple names you might know. And there's about 50 of us in there, and it got a, round of applause. People were crying. I mean, just felt, we sat in that room for maybe an hour and a half just talking about it. And if you go online, you can probably see the conversation that I directed after that piece, which was about 4 or 5 minutes. And Carolyn Peck spoke great about, there is a college in California who had reached out to her many times, a women's sports team who is still getting pushback. The football team wouldn't let them into the locker room. They tried to show up to a basketball game wearing T-shirts that said, I don't know exactly what it said, but something for equal rights in Title IX. And the basketball team literally put up tables so they couldn't enter. They blocked the entrance so they couldn't come in. And this is a Title IX school. So that shows how much, we still need to grow. We still have so much to do. And I will say ESPN has wholeheartedly and started to invest big time in women's sports in the last couple of years. I've also worked on the Women's College World Series the last four years, minus COVID. And that was one of the only sports right after COVID that we were still adding money to the budget instead of taking stuff away, which tells you a lot how ESPN's really focused on investing in women's sports. And I just directed the WNBA game on Tuesday night, and that's another area that we're really investing, trying to get more games on ABC, get more viewers, push this out because it's a product that sells. And a lot of people have been scared to do that, and they're seeing that, hey, this makes money.
And I'd love to ask a follow-up question on that, because, when you read Billie Jean King's book, All In, she talks about the fight that she was always, out in front for was not just equal pay, but also equal airtime. and because they were bringing in as many people. And so as you're looking at, ESPN, stepping up now and doing more, do you have an idea of what the percentage though across the board on, are we close to, where would parity look like, or where are we now to where we need to get for that?
I can't give you exact numbers, but we're nowhere close to near parity.
Close.
Nowhere close. Yeah. Go ahead, Carol.
Well, I was just going to say, I think your point is so great, Jocelyn and Emma, both of you. The misogyny, so to speak, the patriarchal values are ingrained so deep. These people would rather not make money because that's what's happening. The organizations, especially businesses that are visionary, are building up women's programs because that's sort of like the hot business property of the present time. And the people that are hanging back, they'd rather not make money. It's just crazy.
Yeah, they're scared. They don't. It's evident even in my role. I'm the only female at ESPN that directs NBA and NHL, any of our larger sports, and there's only 2 other female directors at ESPN that do sports, that do games, period. So you can imagine that's kind of a cascade of, I didn't benefit Title IX, but that just shows the sports world as a whole is so male dominant that we're still, trying to break down borders and push for equality everywhere.
Wow. And so obviously you're seeing some change, but in your mind, is there something specific, and anyone can answer this, like that you're seeing that needs to happen, that can happen if there is, intentionality from women or supporters of equality that can happen right now to make a change in that?
For me, I think it's just to continue to invest and ignore sometimes the Instagram, the posts, and don't look at the comments that, oftentimes when the ESPN account does post a female doing something, I mean, you can see some of the comments and it's not fun to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is unfortunate that there's still so much of that hate out there and not understanding, but it's because they've grown up never seeing it. And the more they see things, the more they realize, okay, wow, that's just, they are great. They can do these things. We are equal. And so many people are still raised to this day that we are not equal. And that's what we got to fight for.
Yeah. And go ahead. Sorry,
Emma.
I
was just going to say, I will say personally, seeing those comments, it actually drives me it just levels me up because because of the women athletes, the sports, I mean, they are incredible human beings. And so for me as a storyteller and a producer, seeing that stuff just thrives me. And I just want to knock down those walls and tell these stories because it's important. And so those actually just thrive me.
Well, I'm just like you. And I feel like, when a guy says that to me, it's just like, well, you just gave me more fuel, right? Yep. To keep pushing forward. But I also think it leads to a different side of that coin. It's one thing, and obviously in big corporations, it's not easy. One of the reasons I created Teneral Cellars was to literally create something that would challenge the system, right? Mm-hmm. And to build a company that would reflect the industry's largest customer, which is women. But I also know that women need to do more to support each other. I mean, we are the majority in this country, but we have been brought up in systems that have made us believe that women have to fight for one position. We have to take each other out, and we're all fighting for one position. Well, if for the first time, women have the most wealth in this country, but we actually don't control the wealth. We then have men control the wealth. So there are things that somehow in this conversation, I'm hoping that Title IX, as we're celebrating 50 years, but also talking about what needs to get done, and we look at the women's soccer team that was, finally got equal pay, it's to realize the power that we have collectively. And I know it's a simplistic view, but there's so much truth on that. Like, how many people are we still being intentional and conscious about, are we supporting women-owned products? So instead of going to Amazon, are we going to the W Marketplace, which has only women products? are we doing things like that actually will move that needle? And Anna, as I'm thinking about your exhibit, it's like I can only imagine, as you were curating this, how you're able to see those massive discrepancies, and if anything, as we're talking, is sticking out to you about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what Jocelyn and Emma, what you were saying about, the more representation we see, the more normalized it becomes, and it becomes like, this is the place where women are. I think in telling these stories of women's history that we do at the Historical Society, what we are trying to do is say, oh, these things that women are able to do, women have always been trying to do that and always been pushing against these gender norms, that's these barriers against women. And we really want to highlight those stories of how women have pushed against that and have pushed for greater gender equity in sports and in other educational fights, with this exhibit, to give people inspiration and to say, this is that some of the problems have changed, some of them continue to persist, and we can learn from the past examples and as ways of inspiring us to continue to push as we move forward.
So here's a question to anyone that wants to take this. How do we advance equity with the knowledge that we have now, with the data, with everything that's happening? And anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, what I would like to mention sort of ties in with what we were just talking about as well, about what needs to happen. It seems like quite almost inevitably, somebody has to step up and really take a courageous step. And I have sort of spent a lot of time and effort to try to prepare women that do these courageous acts, that they're going to pay a price. And so I think what I like to see an organization like, for example, Women's Sport International, Women's Sport Foundation, try to build whatever resources around these women and like-minded men, but especially women that are going to take these stances, because they are going to take a hit. Catherine Switzer, that was featured as the first Boston Marathon participant, had a lot of trouble with the marathoning community after that. That would be just one example. It goes on and on. Sedona Prince, God, when she got that video onto social media, it just lit a fire, and the NCAA responded in that instance much more strongly than has happened about anything that I can remember in the last decade or two. So, but there's going to be a price to pay, and I think they have to be ready for that. And as you were saying, Jill, women around them need to support that this hit is going to land.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, Anne.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, adding on to that, one of the things that we found in looking at this 50-year history is the role of the internet and social media in the past 10 years, and especially I think even more now, with social media, blowing up the way that it has, is that students at different campuses across the country are able to network and join forces together in ways that weren't possible in the 70s and 80s. I mean, in the 80s, you have the blooming of the Take Back the Night movement, for example, and that catches on across different campuses. But now the ability to connect and to, find people when you're being isolated on your own campus, to connect with people, to learn from, okay, what worked at my own university, Columbia University, what has worked there that maybe others places might learn from and network. And there's been new organizations that have sprung up of students as they graduate, working together to be able to connect and join forces and share resources that I think that's really inspiring, I think, for future changes.
Yeah. Carol, do you have the data, or Emma and Jocelyn? I can't remember if one of you, when we were having a previous call, mentioned this about the percentage of compliance of Title IX right now in universities.
I don't have a really good figure for you. What's more a related issue would be the coaching, women in coaching. And at the time of the AIW, it was about 95% women coaching women in collegiate sport. Then it dropped to a low of 30 or 35% after Title IX actually protected men who wanted to coach women. They were going to get paid now. So all of a sudden that became something that was a desirable step for a man to take. And now it's kind of creeping back up to about 45%. So that would be like maybe a flag in the wind about where compliance is. But and actually, there's been a drop in the numbers of complaints that have come into the federal government, civil justice processes. So I think that this 50th anniversary thing has really, I'm hoping it will open eyes, because I think there was too much of an assumption, we got there already, because of what is available to be seen. And the idea that we're not there yet is not widely understood.
Gotcha. I think we lost Anna for a moment, so our screen is a little off. So thank you, Jocelyn and Emma, for squeezing in there. Jocelyn and Emma, I'm curious, like, what do you see the role of, female athletes and how they can play? Because we're seeing such an increase in athlete activism because they have a platform. And so I'm curious, especially through the lens, you're always looking through a lens to tell stories, like what you're seeing, what's surprising you, what's exciting, what gives you hope.
I would say, this next generation, as we saw with Sedona, they are not afraid. They will not hold back. And we're continuing to see that from the Wubble. And then even now with Brittany Griner's situation, we are constantly bringing attention to what's important, and there is no fear. And it's amazing. It's admirable. And I respect these women and for fighting for what's not only what's important in the lives of women, but what should be in the forefront of our country, like Brittany Griner, for instance. So, so it's admiring for me. It's really impressive.
Yeah, there's so many strong females, and it's amazing to see what they do off the court more than sometimes what they do on the court. I mean, Natasha Cloud's somebody that for me, I just love how active she is and uses her voice and is not scared to do anything. And which is the majority of that generation. And I think I was actually, while we were waiting to hop on here, I was really happy to see ESPN's running a 50-50 initiative. And one thing I think is something that ESPN could do better with is to put those moments like Emma's piece into not just the women's tournament where it's a bunch of women watching the game, but NFL Live, which was, a very male, young audience, which I was really happy to see a 30-second little promo piece for 50-50 run, which was Ann Meyer Drysdale talking about her situation with Title IX and what it did to her. So just to put those in places that people aren't used to seeing it. It's great when it's in the places everybody's used to seeing women stand up and fight, but it needs to be in those places that might make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. They might learn something. And even if we can change one person's mind by it being in that time period or during that show, I think is a huge step forward for the next generation.
Well, and it was wonderful to see the NFL actually had Billie Jean King do the coin toss, and then they did a nice piece before her, to your point, because now you're in front of an audience, a global audience that sees that. And, and I'm curious with a big company like ESPN, because, how do you create systemic change, as a woman within a company, knowing that it may not be well received if you're fighting that fight, but that the generation coming behind you, they're not afraid to fight, and you're seeing more and more women's sports participation. They're a great consumer of products. So it seems to me the economics might actually be there now. Again, you'll know more about that, but I'm just curious in a large company, especially when more and more companies are publicly stating their initiatives around supplier diversity, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, because the B is now being added all the time, because you can have diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yet people don't feel like they belong. And so, what do you do in a big organization like that to create change that you want to see? Because clearly the two of you are producing award-winning material. Why wouldn't you want more Emmas and Jocelyn's in your company?
Yeah, go ahead.
I will say I think ESPN has done a great job of promoting phenomenal women, and we do have quite a few women leaders at VP level, executive VP levels that are just amazing leaders. So I think ESPN was ahead in some of those leadership roles than maybe the rest of the large corporations, but there was still pushback in the lower ranks, right? It's still a lot of males, because you'd get one great female that just rockets right up, right? Which is awesome that ESPN promotes these people that really deserve it. But then at the kind of lower level, there's still a lot of men making the day-to-day decisions. But we're seeing a huge change in that, and the hiring. In the last year, our hiring has been way more diverse in all aspects, male, female, in anything, out there. They're really trying to diversify, which I think only makes our company so much better.
I will also add, Jill, you hit on basically, I've been with the company for 11 years now. And so there's a reason I've stayed here since coming out of college, and it's because they do listen to their employees. And, they want to have those uncomfortable conversations. I mean, open dialogues around Jacob Blake, around George Floyd, around all these tough conversations. They don't shy away from them. And I admire that a great deal, because they are constantly trying to improve. I'm not saying they're perfect beyond means, not at all. But I'm saying in these realms that you're talking about, I am proud to be a part of this company because of the way they do take care of their people, to what Jocelyn is saying, and the representation. And for me, pushing it forward, it's important to me to have, like she said, there is a lot of women at the high up rankings, but I'm nearing the middle ground now. And I'm trying to bring in the women and have a representation that's, like you said. So it's not all men, it's not all white men. So to diversify there is important to me, and for this next generation of ESPN.
Which is like what I said. I'm the only female director that does these high profile games, and I get out on a crew, and there might be one other female back in the tape room, and they are so excited to have a female director, which is awesome. So it's exciting to try to break down more of these barriers, because there's so few of us, and it's exciting to mentor some up and coming directors that will hopefully get to follow my path a little bit.
No, that's fabulous. And speaking of barriers, I mean, we know from data, and Carol, this is going to come back to you, but we know from data that just like so many other things in our culture, the people that are most impacted in a negative way are, women of color, non-conforming genders, members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I was having conversations a few weeks ago with some people in the industry around transgender athletes. And it seems to be the toughest part of this is that there's a lack of data. So the conversations that are happening tend to be more emotional, and instead of fact-based. And so, Carol, can you share or shed any light on data that's happening around transgender athletes? Because the impact on the youth right now, I mean, it's so sad to see that, when we can't have inclusion, especially when we have children that want to play sports, and we all here know the benefit of sport. But even, I mean, there's been more transgender bills passed in a negative way in the last year, I mean, we're going in the wrong direction. So it's just a fight that needs to be fought for inclusion. And Carol, I'd be interested to see where the data is on this.
Well, you put your finger right on the issue that there really isn't data. What has been the base of the previous stances of organizations like the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, they had bans, exclusions on transgender athletes for some time. And the database was almost all on one particular issue within human physiology, and that is testosterone and the impacts of testosterone on muscle building and endurance and so on. Those of us that are the argument on the other side is to bring forward the human rights inclusion issues. And our point with the WSI has been you don't ban or exclude. We know how important sport is. All of us have been working for girls and women's sport our entire lives. So we know how important it is. You don't ban people from that unless your data would absolutely demand that sort of an exclusionary stance be taken. And they're really, if you look at how complicated it is to produce a champion, you just can't stack up data that will say we need to exclude all these people. It's very complicated. And the issue is, the difficulties, I guess, would be that the IOC now has moved a tremendous distance and come up with a framework for inclusion and human rights as the basic, most important value in relation to involvement in sport. But that they're saying, so determining who gets to compete is not, we're not going to decide that. This is going to go to the governing bodies. So you have governing bodies in rugby, fencing, athletics, you name it. And all of a sudden, they're responsible for developing something that's going to be airtight in court. And it's not an issue that is settled by any means. I think some of us that are committed to this kind of human rights vision, very disturbed by the fact that 18 states have now banned high school and junior high school, like children, transgender children, from all sport participation. And it's almost all on the basis that these people are saying we're saving women's sport. Well, it's not. It's really not these transgender children that are threatening women's sport. Let's go back to Title IX compliance. That would be more where I would feel comfortable. So I don't know. I'm probably not answering your question, talking all around. It's extraordinary, but I think it is the issue that needs to be solved as fast as possible. But it's probably not going to be fast.
And thank you, Carol, because part of it is we have to be having these conversations. And so we need to know what data is out there. We need to know what data, what's being done. And we can't forget the human rights side of the conversation. And it's go ahead, Sarah, Carol.
Well, I was going to say, could I say one thing more? I'd really like to hear Anna chime in on this, because where does data come from? Where does research come from? We depend on the academy, the universities, the researchers. But unfortunately, my experience as an academic has been that some of them are the most conservative and most difficult to engage in the human rights conversation. I'm wondering what kind of experience that Anna had with the society putting together this program on Title IX. Did you have great, wonderful participation from all of your academic brethren? I hope so, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't really looking at the research on the history of Title IX, because it's a recent history. There isn't as much academic history yet on this topic. So that's part of why we did so many interviews with activists. And then on this issue, one thing that I think was really surprising in our research and really compelling to me personally as a researcher, as an academic, is how, this issue, people think that, oh, well, we were always going to have sex segregated sports, and so that's the way towards equality. And when you look back at the conversations that people were having in 1972 as Title IX was passed, it was really an open question. And the way that we have proceeded with men's sports and women's sports as completely separated, which is where we have these problems now of where do non-binary and transgender students play and athletes. That wasn't part of the original law. There are other possibilities that were being discussed in 1972, 1973. Do you have co-ed sports in competitive settings? Do you have different kinds of more, creative ways? There were people who were saying sex segregated sports is the same as, race segregation, right? You can't have separate but equal. Like, that doesn't make sense. So the arguments that we see today that we have to ban transgender athletes in order to protect women, it's really disingenuous, because that's not what those 37 words initially said. Like, there's nothing about that said we had to have sex segregation of sports. And so I think, going forward, what we have seen in talking to activists who are engaged in this work more recently is, Title IX, we're continuously over these 50 years redefining sex discrimination and those 37 words. And there's a fight going on now to say gender discrimination is a form of sex discrimination. And, saying that people can't play in teams that affirm their gender identity, that is a form of sex discrimination that should be prohibited under Title IX. And so I think there's that fight too to promote inclusion under Title IX. And I think that's where I hope to see more energy going forward in fighting against these kinds of bans.
Thank you for that. We all need to be focused on that. And as we're getting to our close, Anna, since you said that's what you would like to see, I'm curious, Jocelyn and Emma, now that we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary, what would you like to see moving forward? Is there one thing that sticks out for you that's important for us to really be focusing on? And then, Carol, you as well.
I just want to keep pushing at ESPN for more us being on TV more, being in people's homes, and keep fighting that fight at ESPN to show that our product is just as good as the NBA finals right now. The WNBA finals are going to be just as great. And getting all of the sports, women's softball gets huge ratings. Like, that needs to be on TV more, and it's nowhere. It's such a fun sport, and you see it for about 3 weeks out of the year once it gets to the tournament.
Right.
So
far more exciting than baseball.
Faster. Yes.
That's why. And Jocelyn, as you said that, I think what stuck out for me was Billie Jean King has a great quote. It's like, if you can see it, you can be it. And the more we show it, the more we show girls, and transgender athletes and non-binary, if you can see it, you can be it. And so it's so important that this content gets shared, and really appreciate that.
Yes.
I just, representation matters for me, both in front of the camera and on television and behind it. And because I am behind it and put the product on, it's those who put the work in to put that product in that is important to me. And so the representation there, we actually just brought in a fantastic transgender teammate just 3 weeks ago, and they're fantastic. And so bringing in those representation behind the cameras to produce content to go on is important to me moving forward. So
excellent. Thank you. How about you, Carol?
Well, I can't tell you how it sort of stirs my heart to be on this panel, because I think every one of us, every one of you, is fighting the fight. And I think what I would like to see is more and more people stepping up and saying, I'm not afraid. This is what needs to happen. Certainly, Teneral Cellars you're doing that every day, and the fight for everything that other folks on the panel are doing. I feel like I've been blessed to have contact with people like that, like you all, every step of the way of my life. And I just want to see more people that are realizing it's the best thing you can do. It enlivens your life. It enriches your life to feel that you've taken this step, that you've done whatever needed to be done to move things along today. And so let's just keep it going. That's what I hope to see.
Well, thank you, Carol, and thank you for paving the way for all of us as well. Anna, any last comments or thoughts?
I just want to echo. I mean, I think continuing to push for gender equity in educational spaces and all spaces is, it's a joint project. No one can do it alone. We're all in this together to make more opportunities for the generations to come after us.
Absolutely. So I can't thank each of you enough for being here today. It's so important that we have these necessary conversations. And at Teneral Cellars, we hope that whenever you open a bottle of wine, you open the necessary conversations. We hope people visit teneralcellars.com to look at this new Perfect Match collection and featuring Billie Jean King on our bottle and donating $5 back to the Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative to continue her fight and the work for gender equality and equity. And then we're donating an additional 5% back to the Women of the Vine and Spirit so that we can help change our industry so that it reflects its largest customer, which is women. And for everyone listening, go visit demand9.org, sign the petition. They're trying to get over 1 million signatures so that they can take that to Congress and they can reverse some of the unfortunate reversals that have happened with the previous administration, but continuing the fight. I mean, next to the Civil Rights Bill, this is such one of the most important pieces of legislation in our country to ever have been enacted, but there's so much work to still be done. And I can't thank each of you enough. Get educated if you're listening on Title IX so that you can have those conversations and have them. But just don't have the conversation, take action and stand up for what you believe in. And because it's going to take action for us to make a difference. And it's all of people like you that are helping us get that done. So thanks again, everyone. Emma and Jocelyn, they're celebrating their first wedding anniversary this weekend. So congratulations to the two of you. I wish we had some wine right now to do that, but thank you. Enjoy your anniversary. And again, thanks everybody for joining us today. And we hope to see you on the next episode of Teneral Talks.
Thank you very much, Jill and
thank you
Carol
so much.
and Anna. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.